Reef Omar says people like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds funded many movements just to infiltrate and take over. A prime example would be the women's suffrage movement. What these groups do run deep. That's what he's saying. You want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, this is cultural warfare is what it's all about, and they will infiltrate everything and corrupt everything that they can, you know. And I'm not. There's always nuance, and sure, you get you pro eugenics Margaret Sanger type of creatures, you know, as representatives of the 1920s and 30s suffragettes. But you also have very, very authentic, good, rational, moral human beings like Helen Keller and a lot of Madame Curie and her daughter also, you know, basically saying like, well, why don't women also get the right to vote? We're humans. We can use reason as well as, you know, as anybody. Madame Curie goes and, you know, discovers several elements on the periodic table, works with Mendeleev. And, you know, her daughter makes a Nobel Prize discovery as well with Joliette. Yeah, so you've got, obviously, women have definitely been abused and misused for most of human history. Women have been treated for much of that time. You know, in the case of France, they were only given the right to vote in the 1950s. You know, in Saudi Arabia, they were allowed to drive a car like last year or something. You know, women had to get, when my grandma was just a young mother, she had to get, you know, her husband to write a letter allowing her to pick up her kids from school. You know, like, what is that? You know, in the 1950s, you know, she had to get a letter from her husband to have the right to have a credit card. So, I mean, there's a lot of abuse and misabuse and double standards that have been applied that have created legitimate cause for grievance from women for much of human history. That being said, like I said, anything will be corrupted, infiltrated, and turned into its own worst enemy, as we see now that much of the feminist movement has been induced to now champion biological males becoming like leaders in sports and gold medalists in you know, swimming and tennis and everything else. And these are like, so what's happening, right? I mean, yeah. Or BLM, right? Black Lives Matter, other things, right? Like, do African Americans have a cause for grievance? And, you know, is there evidence of systemic racism in Western culture? Yeah, I think there is evidence of systemic racism. Sure, there's a real reason why you have the masses, especially of young African Americans, who have a lot of grief and anger that have been built up and it was never resolved. But it's just channeled by George Soros type creatures to weaponize these groups, whether it's women or Black people or another minority group, and just channel it for the effects of ultimately destroying these very people and their cause at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing that the Taiwanese are going to be discovering increasingly, and the Ukrainians are now discovering. You know, you thought that these powerful financiers were backing you and cared about your freedom and liberty and right to have democracy. No, you're like a silkworm, people. You will be useful to the degree that you extract the silk, and then you will be burned on the fire or fed to the fish. Like, that's what the British always do. That's the British imperial way. You have no permanent friends, just permanent interests, and you always play the weaker against the stronger. And then when the weaker becomes stronger, then you find a third party that's more weaker that you play against them, and you sacrifice them before they get too strong. And you just always play that game.
Mm.